Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we are back this time to have, I think, a very important conversation about Earth Day with Kathleen Rogers, president of the Earth Day Network. Earth Day, which takes place each year on April 22nd, becomes a more significant celebration every year that we race further into the climate crisis. The first Earth Day in 1970 shows the potential for America and the world to change. It was the largest public day of action in U.S. history. More than 20 million Americans went into the streets in support of environmental reform. And following that first Earth Day, Congress and President Nixon launched the Environmental Protection Agency, Clean Air Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, and National Environmental Education Act, which was followed 2 years later by the Clean Water Act. Before those changes, American air and water were far dirtier, so much so that it's hard to explain how much it has changed. Only with the arrival of uncontrolled wildfires related to climate change do we have comparably bad air in the United States, but only for a few days per year, at least at this time. We made a lot of progress. Now, Kathleen and the Earth Day Network organize the global Earth Day celebration each year. The 50th anniversary of Earth Day was planned as a billion-person march all around the planet, but it and the 51st event went largely online because of the pandemic. This year's program will focus on investing in the planet, from making sustainable investments like those we often talk about on Sustainability in Your Ear, as well as how to invest in creating a better future by getting involved in your community through activism, creating healthier communities, and how each of us can make personal changes to reduce our impact. But most importantly, each of us can send signals to companies and the institutions that we interact with, asking for sustainable alternatives to carbon-era packaging and products. So let's discover what's on tap for Earth Day 2022. You can, of course, learn more about Earth Day at www.earthday.org. Welcome to the show, Kathleen. How are you?
Fine. Thank you for having me. Well, nice to talk to you again.
It is. It's good that we're all starting to get back together. I understand that this year's Earth Day Gala will be in person again. It's great to hear that physical contact is returning. How has Earth Day changed, though, since, say, 2018 or 19 because of the pandemic? How has it reshaped your mission?
Well, interestingly, this is our third Earth Day with the cloud of COVID over our head. Now, the skies are sunnier, and for the most part, and this is true around the world, not just the United States, people have emerged and are not just excited about doing something for their planet, but they're much more active than I've seen them in recent years. Now, even during COVID, cleanups, petitions, all the things you see people doing, tree planting, all of that volunteer work and activism work took place worldwide, despite Earth Day. And, one of the main things that earthday.org does is educate people. And so we were able to do a lot of that. Now, interestingly also, and that's why the question is so important, is the 2 years of COVID, actually underneath them were massive changes going on climate change and weather and destruction. And so you have these enormous things swirling around in the last 2 years that make that question so much more important, because as we were forced to find new ways of convincing people to take action virtually as opposed to in person, we also had the climate change imperative, the forest fires, the meetings of various leaders around the world, action by corporations, all this stuff was swirling at the same time. It wasn't able to emerge. So the other thing I think about why your question's so good is because not only did COVID sort of take the wind out of the sails of the big events that we see happening during Earth Day, the commitments of mayors, the commitments of governments, the commitments of corporations, along with the volunteer work. But we also saw all this action on climate change, biodiversity loss, et cetera, that wasn't able to emerge the way it can during normal Earth Days, when we, in a way, weirdly own the press because everyone's looking for an Earth Day story. Sure. And so it's this combination of the desecration of the planet and the incredibly difficult time that all humanity's had because of COVID. And I think you're going to see a lot of interesting things emerge as the COVID cloud lifts.
Well, I agree. What happened is climate change became painfully tangible, and everything associated with COVID gave us a preview of what the world disrupted by climate change will be like in 10, 15, or 20 years. And so a lot of people are waking up to the fact that this is a serious problem, and they're doing so through the internet, which is one of the good things that has come out of our history so far. But 2021 was a pivotal year, and COP26, the UN meeting in Glasgow, included some significant announcements about sustainability goals by nations and companies. But how do you feel we're doing in terms of our progress on stopping CO2 emissions and beginning to restore the planet?
Well, I am by nature an optimist. Today's a bad day to ask me that question, but in many ways, things have gotten a lot worse. I think that the countries put their everything on the line in Paris, and people were, again, sort of amazingly optimistic about what they could get done. But when the rubber hit the road and they actually had to start doing something about these pledges that they'd made, then things slowed. And what I saw at the COP meeting were many fewer commitments. And to the extent there were any commitments, the loopholes swallowed the commitments. So on methane or deforestation, they appeared to be taking action, but then they carved out all these exceptions to what companies or countries or whatever had to do. And so I don't think I saw the progress that people who felt the need to be optimistic for a bunch of reasons. I mean, optimism's good. If you're suddenly negative, then everybody will be negative. And so it's really important to push things forward. And I appreciate why governments said that the COP was relatively successful. But on the ground there and meeting with people, I saw something different. Now, what I did see, which made me really happy, it has a caveat, but I'll get to that in a second, was that business was there in full force. Mm-hmm. And the commitments, technologies, the structural revolutions that they were preaching and or creating deals right around in the place. Everywhere you could see these deals being made. And the amount of optimism around the green economy that was projected by business and inventors and innovators was really heartening. On the other hand, I have to say, when we went to these big meetings where you had 300 or 400 people in the room talking about the sort of green tech revolution and renewable energy revolution and all the other things that come with it, which were pretty amazing. It was more or less the global north in the room. So you did not see a lot of African countries or other countries participating, but nonetheless, it was, I was quite heartened by that. And as I think I mentioned, earlier, the theme for Earth Day is sort of built upon what we saw at the COP for those very reasons.
Well, let's talk about that. How do you see investing in the planet taking shape for an individual who's thinking about getting involved in Earth Day? What guidance are they going to be able to get through earthday.org? What kinds of events might they attend to learn about how to push the economy in the direction they want it to go?
Well, I'm one of those people, and I always call myself a very imperfect environmentalist. I'm a rabid recycler, and but I drive my car to work. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, and this is an evolution of my 20 years doing environmental work, I have felt that there was too much emphasis and blaming of people for the state of the world. And so I am one of those people who believes that the responsibility needs to be shared equally, business, governments, NGOs. And by that, NGOs, I mean faith groups. I mean, anybody who's in civil society has a role to play. But again, it's a three-legged stool, and the stool is never going to be even. And you're never going to be able to sit on it if you cannot get all three of these parts of society working together. And so for Earth Day, we have, enormous numbers of resources on our website, toolkits for everything from letter writing campaign to planting trees, to holding town hall meetings, to doing events. We have staff working all over the world, putting together events on their own and with organizations. We have over 175,000 groups in our network. And so we can really work with them and get a lot done that we don't command and control in any way. And we know, for example, as kids go back to school and teachers are just so far behind, not through their own fault, and our hearts are totally with them, that generally speaking, 98 to 100% of our schools do Earth Day events in their classrooms. So we provide information and tools for them to work with their students. And again, it's K through 12. We're also working with universities on a number of things. It can be an event. It can be working with their dean or their president of their university or college to get commitments and push things like better food in cafeterias. And by that, I mean, using regenerative agriculture or organics or locally grown produce, all of these kinds of actions where we as individuals or consumers can push people to do the right thing. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, and that's true for every activist in whatever field you're in. And so we tend to try and encourage people to make as much noise around Earth Day. And long ago, it became less about a day and more about, Earth Day, Earth Week, practice. Earth Season. So we're seeing enormous volunteer activities and cleanups, tree planting, but also a lot of, I'll call it small p political activism, pushing people to do the right thing. And we're also seeing more commitments by corporations who, for economic and other reasons, might I even say a conscience, are doing remarkable things to change their businesses to something that is both more sustainable and, faithful to their principles of businesses can do good.
Are you finding that you're attracting more corporate backers who are interested in improving their environmental, social, and governance performance, or ESG performance? And how is Earth Day going to facilitate dialogue between those companies and people? Are you thinking about how to, beyond letter writing campaigns, can we create forums where these kinds of conversations can start to happen?
Yes, that is exactly what we're trying to do, and not just on around Earth Day. Our theme, which is exactly that, Invest in Our Planet, is focused on bringing people together for dialogues. We've done this many times. We've brought an interesting one is we bring naysayers from my own community together with industry leaders and government officials to iron out differences about way a technology can be engaged or employed. And I've done it with light bulbs, with electric vehicles, with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We've done it so many times where we are in that really unique position of being able to broker, not the deal so much as the conversation, sometimes the deal too. But we've seen this play out over and over again, that is the world's best way to get something, I'll call it radical, done. Because if you really want to get companies to push themselves and challenge themselves, there's nothing better than having the environmental community hanging out that carrot if they stretch a little further.
A few minutes ago, you referred to yourself as an imperfect environmentalist, and I certainly would count myself the same way. Everybody is making their own changes, and we all do things differently. It's just the nature of being alive. But you also mentioned the fact that people blame one another, and that has become, I think, one of the barriers to the dialogue that we're talking about. In particular, we tend to focus on the youth who are going to suffer the most from climate change, which is absolutely a certainty. However, we need to get all generations involved. How can Earth Day as an event or as a component of our online existence help create a multi-generational dialogue so that we can start to make collective changes like you described earlier?
Well, I think there are a number of ways. We have for a long time promoted exactly that. We do it through cleanups where we'll match up schools with grandparents or senior groups. We've worked with organizations like AARP and others to promote those conversations because many older people have time on their hands, but they don't want that time on their hands. And so we'll often look for ways to engage people, particularly from that community. The youth movement is very interesting because, as you know, and I'm sure we were much more activists when we were younger in most parts of our lives, but that community ages out. And so we're continuing to push youth because I think their voices are super relevant.
Absolutely.
To join that community. So you have someone like, name your activist who was 15, 16, whatever, or even younger, and are now headed to college. And that kind of momentum of getting on with your life is really compelling. And so it's hard to be the activist you are when you're trying to prepare for your career. And so I think the way to foster that is to keep creating avenues and opportunities to both bring new youth into this movement, and also to what I call a feedback loop from people who are older. Now, most youth, including myself when I was young, try not to or intentionally don't listen to anything, from anybody except their own generation. But I am seeing, because we have an enormous network of youth leaders. It's called My Future, My Voice. There are leaders from around the world, the top of their fields in the youth movement. And what I found is if you let them give you their demands and you help them filter it or refine it, that they are perfectly willing. It's like being an editor of the movement. And so while we never pretend to be in charge, if you do it the right way, you can become what I call the editor of the movement, whether it's how they say things or why they say things, or even suggesting to them people they should meet or avenues they should explore where we think the pressure points would be more effective. So it's really, your question's so important because my community definitely needs to work with youth. And I don't mean because it's, sort of the flavor of the day or whatever. It's all of a sudden everybody's working with youth, but I mean on a sustained long-term basis. And that also means, interestingly, to many youth, it's hyping and explaining and inspiring this generation to become those innovators, those inventors. Unfortunately, those psychiatrists of the future who are going to have to deal with the emotional toll of climate change. But if you talk to them about jobs and careers, they're not just in it to protest, they're in it to go somewhere. So a lot of what we do is provide that intergenerational support, but we also promote ways we think that they should be engaged, that at the end of the day, when they do age out, that they will have a place to put all that energy, whether it's green business or medicine or whatever it is. So, or even joining my community. But it's important to give them avenues for that expression and also at least point to a horizon where they can live their lives, make money, and still be participating in the green economy and green life. So I think that's a really great question and something that we ask ourselves every day. How can we be better at it? But that seems to be the way we have ended up having so many groups really like our network.
Now, one of the things that you're going to offer is guidance about what kinds of local, state, and federal policy people should be advocating for through various aspects of your communication. What are the highest priority issues for you this year? Could we do something as big as launch the EPA or Clean Air Act again?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you just asked this question because as we speak, and it'll be going on for the next 4 months, what we have is the very first plastics treaty, the introduction of the plastics treaty. It's happening in Nairobi, but it was submitted by interesting combination of Rwanda and Peru. And we did a big program with them a few months ago that was really great. And we also introduced in that program inventors, people who are inventing their way out of plastics, which I think is sort of the missing element of the treaty now. It's all about controlling flow and minimizing waste and coming up with a different version of plastic. But and Japan joined it as well. So it's now covering marine-based pollution, plastics, which in my view, there are two things about plastics I'd like to say. One, it is equal to the threat of climate change. And two, it is the same as climate change. They're both made out of oil. So both problems. But I think the health issue related to plastics is extraordinary, whether it's reproductive issues. I'm getting incredibly dire advice from pediatricians on declining fertility rates around the world, cancers and everything else, and that we all have, hundreds of millions of micrograms of plastics in our bodies and consume them every day. I consider this the number one public health threat in the world. Yet we are approaching it so gingerly and slowly. But it is big news that finally we're doing something. Will we figure out a substitute for plastic? I hope in the next 10 years. And not maybe for all plastics. Some of the surgical plastics may not go away, but the average day-to-day plastic use, it's got to go away. And so in addition to, that's one of the big issues we're excited about. I think, again, back on business, and it's very odd for Earth Day to be so excited about what business is doing, but we recognize that the amount of money floating around in the world that could be put to use, I mean, it's unbelievable. There's never been a richer time in human history. And by that, I mean massive amounts of cash. And that could all be, and I'm seeing it, invested in green products because, business people look ahead. They don't look to today or tomorrow's news. They're looking 5, 10, 15 years ahead. They read the writing on the wall. And they know that if they create a brand new product, it's just like a brand new, phone. Everybody's going to run out and buy it. So it's also a way to keep the economy going and coming up with something that's truly 100% biodegradable that also doesn't take a toll on farming or air pollution or other things to create it. All of that's being done inside labs and inside garages as we speak.
We see the same thing and try to surface a lot of those stories for our readers. The interesting challenge I see with regard to plastics is as we innovate new types of plastic, bio alternatives to plastic, I also see complaints from the recycling industry that is going to be unrecyclable. And so they're trying to raise blockers to adoption of non-petrochemical based plastics. How do we shine the light on the real questions around the transition we need to make in the economy when we are getting so many conflicting versions of reality? And this is also another byproduct of the internet, which is a good thing and a bad thing.
Well, I'm going to tell you a quick story because I think it illuminates the whole conversation. And that's also a great question. While I was searching on the internet, as I do continually, about the Industrial Revolution, because I'm a total fan and student of it, I found the minutes from a meeting of horse carriage makers. It was a conference that was put together by everybody who made a carriage.
Yep.
And they all got together, and it was organized by a guy named Studebaker. And Studebaker was one of the largest carriage makers in the world. And so I found and read the minutes of this meeting. And it was all about the threat of the horseless carriage.
Yep.
And the minutes are hilarious in retrospect. But at the end of the meeting, all the carriage owners basically said, carriage makers said, oh, nah, it's not going to happen. We're going to stay in our same business. And they took a vote of where they wanted to go. And Studebaker was the only one that said, I don't think so. And all of those carriage makers almost immediately went out of business, and Studebaker became the second largest automobile company manufacturer in the United States. Eventually, they were bought out. But I think that tells the tale. And you're absolutely right. People that are promoting either untruths or whatever, they're just afraid. One thing I know after living this long is people love the status quo. They hate change for the most part. There are those, very intrepid people out there who thrive on it. But for the most part, whether it's family or faith or what you see on television, whatever it is, unless it's so shockingly good and new, which means you'll have early adapters, what you have are people that are just stuck in their old ways. And it's not just this generation, it's been forever. Mm-hmm. And so it takes time to move people. It takes inspiration. I look back at the Kennedy and the space thing. I mean, when you measured, which they did, the amount of enthusiasm in this country for these new technologies around space because of one speech, one leader who inspired people to go to the moon, who made us all believe, everybody on the planet at the time believed. If you read the polls of what those people believed, they all thought it was doable. Yes, there was the outliers who said it can't be done. It's a waste of money. But it inspired a generation, not just of scientists going to the moon, but science in general. And so, and jobs, many, many jobs in the field, whether it was math or others, teaching, all of that rallied around and became an inspiration for a generation. And the money followed, the technology followed on the backs of that speech. Now, did Kennedy know that we could go to the moon based on what he knew about the technology? Probably. But we have those exact technologies. If I were leading this country, I'd be out in every cold field. I'd be preaching the green economy. I'd be out there with the people who are the status quo adherents that are really finding it difficult to change and accept climate change as an opportunity as well as a threat, and convince them that this is the greatest thing that's ever happened since the telephone, the horseless carriage, or going to the moon. Well, we have to inspire people.
And the thing we need to do is not just point out that there's a chasm we need to cross, but that there's a bridge to get across it. So we have to open the bridge.
Absolutely.
So you talked about changes. Let's turn to individual changes. And you've got an article up on the site about 52 tips to invest in the planet. Can you tell us 2 things that you're doing personally that are changes for you that you think are the right thing to be doing?
Well, this is an expensive one. So it depends on your economies, but we had a bunch of really old cars. I can't even tell you how old the cars were we were driving. It was embarrassing. We had a Prius with 378,000 miles on it. We still, it just kept going and going. But we actually decided to go get rid of most of these cars, which our kids and everybody had, and get an EV. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a great expenditure, not for the average person and who hasn't saved for it like we did. But I must say, it is, despite its, relatively short range, it feels like I've done something monumental. Perhaps maybe one of the things I've done other than my job to feel like I've actually done something for the environment. On the other hand, I am dead serious about me being an avid recycler. Now, there's a caveat to recycling, which is, as you know, 80% of recycling is not profitable for the companies that do it. There are very limited numbers of products, glass, newspaper, a few others, cans, that can be recycled, sometimes plastics. And so we have to, so one of the things I do personally is really advocate for my county, Montgomery County, outside of Washington, to spend as much money as it's going to take to recycle products, because I don't want them ending up in our landfills. I think the last one, and I've come to this really recently, is that fast fashion, meaning the big companies that change their products and their fashion lines every 3 weeks. People don't understand this, but that is somewhere between 6 and 10% of all carbon emissions. And in addition to that, massive pollution. And we're all wearing plastic. If you're not wearing cotton, then you're wearing oil. You're wearing microfibers. You're wearing things that are the equivalent of eating, literally digesting a credit card, sometimes up to a day, because all of that comes off in our water and on our skin. So I am really preaching to my kids and to myself that if we're going to buy something, it has to be something I'm going to keep a long time. I am really interested in pushing companies that have good environmental records, but are blindly turning their eye to the materials that they use in their clothes, because I think you're going to see fashion and its impacts on climate, on our health, on our water, on our land, because you have to clear so much land for even growing cotton, that I think you're going to see this as an emerging issue that people are not going to be happy with, because people can walk into stores and buy nice stuff, or looks nice at the time anyway, for $5 or even less than that. And then in 3 weeks, the whole fashion line will change. So that's one of our new campaigns at Earth Day. I think it's part of the whole plastics problem that we have. And I also think over the long term, companies and countries that are invested heavily or have oil as their, or gas, whatever it is, as their only commodity, they really need to diversify. And so I think you're also seeing a big push that we're engaged in, which is pushing oil producing countries to start thinking about what happens when it's all over. But instead, what we're seeing is that many of these countries are building major plastic factories outside of their own countries, and they're also promoting materials made out of plastic. So those are 3 big issues. And then on just quickly, again, spending less money on energy, being really concerned about how we approach our food systems and waste are also little things that we can do. Again, companies play a main role, but those are 3 or 4, or actually 5 of the things that I'm focused on.
Well, Kathleen, there's a lot to do, and I'm glad that you shared those ideas. We'll, of course, include a link to the article in the introduction of the podcast so that people can take action. I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me, Mitch.
We've been talking with Kathleen Rogers, president of the Earth Day Network. And of course, you can visit Earth Day Network at earthday.org. There is a page about Earth Day 2022. Check it out, along with the article that we'll provide a link to in the story accompanying this podcast. 52 ideas to take action this year to improve the planet, to invest in the planet. Folks, it really is important that we think in terms of change. It is hard. It's not easy to move into a future, particularly one as unpredictable as ours constantly proves to be. But we can do it, and we have done it many times before. Earth Day is an opportunity to get out into the streets, into your community, to talk with your friends, neighbors, and family about making changes to make this planet survive. Rather than the planet, this species survive the next 200 to 300 years. Because if we can get through all of this, we have a very, very bright future. I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast and all the others that we've done, about 270 now, with your friends and family. Get everybody thinking about more ideas so that we can create less waste and preserve this planet. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. And in the meantime, I hope you'll take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.